Good morning, everyone. How are you all doing today? I hope you're well. Time is very, very short these days, so I need to get on with something while we chat. Now, the first job of this morning is to thread all my onions into the drying rack. There's metal, spider's web, sticky spider's web, metal mesh, point the foliage down through, helps them just dry out. For storage, fantastic. Now, I'm a bit, I don't know if I can talk and work at the same time. I'm a bit delayed doing this because the day I lifted them, I had very, very little time. I did not have time to thread them up here. It takes ages. So all I did was I sort of just laid them out on here, on the seat, just laid them everywhere, just so they had a little bit of air circulation before I could get back today to do this proper threading. I can't do two things at once. Let's have a sit and a chat. Oh, and here comes Monroe. Hello, little Monroe. Right, I need to make some room for you because I've got the wheelbarrow in here. It's chaos. But come on into the shed and let's have a little chat. Okay, that's better. I can concentrate if I'm just sitting chatting. So let's have a bit of a catch up. What bonkers times. By the time you see this, I think it'll be a week since I showed you the allotment tour. Okay, warts and all today. You know, this has not been an easy year. And it's really evident from my garden, the state the garden is in, that it's not been an easy year. Oh, and I'm just going to say straight up for any of the trolls, no, I'm not having a pity party. I'm just saying it how it is and, you know, hopefully encourage anyone who is maybe only 1 or 2 years into their food growing adventure to say, because I think a lot of people have had a tough year this year. It's not always this bad. So, today it's now 6 weeks since I had a proper gardening session. In this last 6 weeks, literally all I've done is I had that day when I trimmed back all the tomato foliage, excuse me, in the hopes of staving off blight. I came back a week later, ostensibly to lift the onions. I'll tell you about them in a minute. And it was then that I noticed the blight was actually in the stems of the Gardener's Delight and the orange cherry tomatoes. So on that day, it was an onion and tomato day. I just made the decision there and then, right, that's it. Have all of those fruits off, take them home in the hope that they'll ripen. I don't need any green tomato recipes, thank you. I'm not a fan. I will, if they don't ripen, I will try Richard and Paul's green tomato, not chutney. I hate chutney. Oh, no, I really hate chutney. Green tomato curry recipe. I'll put a link up here. Now, the chances are, as they ripen at home, blight will come out, blight will show in them. Fingers crossed it doesn't. So yeah, on that day, the tomato plants, the Gardener's Delight orange cherry, the plants came out completely destroyed, taken away from the site. And I've left the Amish paste and Rose de Berne plants in, minus their foliage, because they looked fine a week ago. Coming back today, I can see one bit of darkened stem on one of the Amish paste. So it's a job for today is to get the rest of the fruit off and do exactly the same. Take them home, hope they'll ripen, get the plants out, destroy them. So on that second session, I wanted to get the onions lifted and get my brassicas in. The brassicas to go in place of the onions are Savoy cabbages and calabrese. I've been saying it all year, I'm just so behind. I've literally been behind since the get-go. So I'm behind on getting those in. They've been in their pots in the cold frame. They look quite stressed. They've had times when they've been really, really dry, times when they've been really, really wet. It looks like, because I've had the cold frame windows open, it looks like things, butterflies and therefore caterpillars have got in. There's been some nibbles. Hopefully there is something still to plant, and the purple sprouting broccoli. Anyway, that day I came to lift the onions, the reds. So I normally plant about 100 of each, a little bit more than 100 of each. The idea being that that gives me 2 red and 2 white per week for a whole year. I prefer more, if I had to, I'd rather have, say, 3 white and 1 red. The red I use slightly less. The red I use mostly raw for salads. The whites I use more for cooking, but I will cook the reds if that's all I've got. So the reds were great. That's what I'm going to start stringing now. About 100. Brilliant. The whites, I planted 125 in the end. 75 Cupido and 50 Stir-On. Cupido, great, got all 75. Stir-On, of the 50 I planted, 44 were completely rotten. Oh, so disgusting. So I managed to get 6 of those. So I don't know what went wrong there. I don't know if it was the sets themselves. It's a set I've never used before, Stir-On. They're in the same bed as the Cupido. That bed hasn't been an onion bed for 4 or 5 years or more. Anyway, I lost pretty much the lot with the Stir-On. So it's left me with 175-ish onions, which is now why it's really important and precious that I get them all up on the rack, get them dried so they're stored. I think, in all honesty, the theme for the garden over the next 2 months is going to be a rescue mission. Just rescue what I can. So yeah, literally in the last 6 weeks, that's all I've done is destroy tomato plants and lift onions. And it's something I was talking about either in the previous video or the one before that, as part of we've been talking about it in the last few videos. It's just simply not viable. It's not good enough to only have 2 gardening sessions in 6 weeks at the height of summer. You know, that just is not going to work. I know for a fact, without even looking, I know for a fact there'll be cucumbers which are massive and have already gone yellow and are probably starting to rot on the plants. Possibly the same with cucumbers. There are beans which will have gone over, they'll have started to dry already when I wanted to have them demi-sec. So yeah, it's not been a great gardening year for me. Excuse me. I've stirred up dust. I've been starting to take the lemon balm down to make space for the onions, and it's stirred up dust. I'm just reaching for my water. Now, I know there's probably a lot of folk in the UK, and probably in other parts of the world too, who are talking about this being a rough year. I can't speak for folk around the rest of the world, but certainly for me here in London, there have been 2 big factors this year. The weather has not helped. We had a cold, wet spring, right to the end of May, cold and wet. So that in some cases, seeds that were planted were actually just rotting in the ground before they even had a chance to germinate. The rest of the summer has been pretty wet. We've had some absolute scorching days. 2nd week of June, 2nd week of July, absolutely baking hot. Beautiful. But generally, it's been warm and very wet. And of course, with the wetness, the blight comes. And with the wetness, the slugs and snails come. I've lost so much to the slugs and snails this year. That's partly because of the weather and they're just having a whale of a time, but also partly because I haven't been here to put out my slug traps, to foil them. I think if I'd had a more normal gardening year, as in normal by my standards, which is 3 or 4 visits a week, really from June right through to the end of September, I might have had a chance of staying on top of that. But like, for instance, this period now, 6 weeks, not here, I don't stand a chance against them. So that hasn't helped things. So I know that for a lot of folk, the weather has had a massive impact. Oh, and of course, with the rain, the weeds proliferate, don't they? But by far the biggest issue this year for me has been time. I just haven't been here. You know, through the whole of spring, March and April, I wasn't here really. A couple of visits last couple of weeks of April. May, a few visits, but then it was chucking down. So when I did have the time, it was just not the right kind of weather to be making the beds, prepping the beds. I sound like I'm making a ton of excuses now, and I'm not trying to excuse myself, but it's just trying to explain this is what happens to a garden if you don't garden it. It's a crazy jungle out there, and you know, it's really green, that's great, but you know, not being here has meant I haven't kept on top of the slugs and snails. Not being here has meant that I haven't kept on top of training my squash and my cukes, etc., up onto the frames, which means I've got fruit sitting on the floor, especially with the cukes, they'll rot more quickly on the floor. Yeah, I like I said, I've been on the back foot all year. Right from the beginning of May, I think at that time I was saying I feel like I'm 6 weeks behind. So at the beginning of May, I was doing jobs that I would normally want to do in the middle of March. Worked really, really, really hard through May to try and get back on top of things, and we had all that awful weather. So even as we went into June, the beginning of June, I was kind of doing my beginning of May jobs. The only thing I kept on track with was my home sewings, because I could do that despite the weather. And then I think by the time we got to the beginning of July, that was the first time this year in the garden where I felt I was just on the cusp of catching up with myself. I was just getting to the stage where I was thinking, okay, there's still a few things to do, like brace the bean arches, that sort of thing, but I think from now on, yeah, I can manage it. And then boom, 16th of July to now, what are we? We're nearly at the end of August. I haven't been here, so it's not even a case now of being behind, but it's a case of, you know, I've kind of lost the garden this year. Now, I'm not being doomy and gloomy about it. I've done that on my own at home. There is still food out there. Yay! Beans, hopefully, and squash. And spuds. Hopefully some parsnips. But I've had to give myself permission to have that moment of being really, really upset about the situation and really kind of feeling angry at the world for putting me in this situation. But now it's time to say, okay, I can't change the way the last 8 months have gone. I can't do anything about that. All I can do now is try to rescue what is there. And I think one of the reasons for saying this today, for sharing this today, is for any of you who are also feeling a little bit overwhelmed and hopeless about your gardens. Maybe you've been away from your garden too. yeah, there's a huge amount of work to do. If I wanted the garden to look as my garden would normally look at this time of year, there would be a huge amount of work to do, and actually more work than I could possibly imagine, manage, more work than I could possibly manage, even if I was to come to the garden now every single day for the next month. I still wouldn't be able to, get it back. And in the space of the next month, I am not going to be able to come to the garden every day for the next month. I've looked at my schedule. I think if I'm lucky, I might get 1 day a week here, maybe 2. I'm still going to be taken away from London quite a bit. I've still got quite a lot. So, you know what? The best will in the world, I am not going to get the garden back to where I'd like it to be. So, and hopefully this is something you can say to yourself too. So once I can kind of accept that, begrudgingly, now I can say to myself, okay, well, what are the priorities? And I suppose it's quite simple, really. There are 2 priorities. One is to get in the things that still need to go in, these brassicas, for example. And 2 is to sort of, in the next couple of days, I'll do this in another video, I'm going to do it, hopefully in 2 days' time, come back, is to do a rescue harvest. Excuse me. So the plan with that will be that I literally pick everything. So even the things which are large and mushy and that I don't want to eat, so courgettes, cucumbers, that sort of thing, even pick the large mushy ones. They will probably end up in the compost heap. Fine, adding to the compost. But the idea with doing this big pick of pretty much everything will be that I can encourage the plants to produce a bit more and just try and extend this season. So I think that's a good plan for me. So emergency harvesting and getting in those things that I still need to get in, the brassicas ostensibly. If I can get those couple of things done in the next few days, then over the coming weeks, the priority will be to keep on top of harvesting. And frankly, things like cutting the grass, trimming my edges, weeding, they are just not a priority. I have to, I keep doing that song from Frozen, I have to let it go. Yeah, I just have to let that go for this year. You know how much I hate that. But yeah, I just have to let it go because I just don't have the time. Now look, if by some miracle I get the time, I may do a bit of that. I may do a bit of weeding. Or if I'm doing a bit of harvesting and there's a really big, obnoxious, obvious weed next to where I'm harvesting, I'll quickly yank it out. But yeah, so that's I'm trying to rationalise it and hopefully, help any of you who are... Because I think the other thing, just to say, is I think when the garden gets so out of control like this, or, such a mess, I think we can get into that kind of fear of going back to the garden. What I mean is, we might visit the garden, do a bit of picking and think, oh my goodness, the work, it's overwhelming. And because of that, we stay at home and stick our head in the sand because it's almost too much to contemplate. And I would say that that's probably the worst thing you can do. It's better to do something than nothing, I think. So if you can only manage half a day in your garden, at least use that time to harvest what is there. Don't let the harvest go to ruin if you can help it. Now, obviously there are some of you have exceptional circumstances at the moment where you simply can't go to the garden because of illness, surgery, whatever. I'm talking about people like me who have been taken away from the garden quite a lot against their will. I don't want to leave the garden. But now you can get back. So yeah, don't sit at home worrying about it and feeling guilty about it. Get down there, and if nothing else, harvest. So if I can do those 2 things, get the brassicas in, do this big rescue harvest in the next couple of days. Then what I will aim to do over the next 4 weeks, so taking us towards the end of September, is, and this is kind of the way for me to make sense of it, if I can only come once a week, harvest, that's my priority, but then I can tackle one bed at a time because I've got 4 beds. So I can say to myself, let's say it's Tuesday, I get down here, I can have a whole day, whiz around the garden, pick, get my harvest sorted, and then say, okay, bed number 1, let's get in there, let's get it weeded, let's get it deadheaded, let's do whatever it needs, let's get it done, and then I can walk away thinking, okay, bed 1 is a bit more sorted, and just repeat that process for the next sort of 3 beds. Oh, 5 beds including the herb bed. Never known a year like it. Oh, the other thing as well, when I do the emergency harvest of all the veggies, I'm hoping we're going to have a couple of dry days now, because I would like to do a mass harvest of calendula and lavender. I really don't want to lose those harvests. They're really important to me. I had thought about it the day I came down to do the onions, but the day I was doing the onions it was drizzling. And even today it looks like it might, you know, we're not having lashing rain, but just these damp, drizzly days, and we do not want to be harvesting our flowers in drizzly rain. So there we go, that's where I'm up to at the moment. What can you do? Like I said, this year has absolutely not gone to plan. I can't do anything about what has been. All I can do is try to do something about what's coming. But even with what's coming, I might get another couple of curveballs and be really scuppered. But I think it's one of those years to be really brave and to just say, you know what, I doubt this will happen, but if I lose the lot, that's awful, but I've still got my garden, you know, excuse me, still got my garden, and next year is another year, and there have been lessons learned this year. Way back in, I think it was in June, when I was still feeling really far behind, I just sort of sat down one evening, really late. I'd had a session in the garden. I think I'd come home, I'd been editing, I'd been on the computer all evening, you know, popped a video out, I'd been, you know, replying, what have you. Late on, I sat down with a notepad to try to work backwards to see exactly where I'd messed up so badly in terms of timing, to then create a model for next year for my timings. Not, like I say, with the seed sowing that goes on at home. I was spot on with all of that this year. Years and years of practice of doing that, get it spot on. But the hard graft. See, that's the other thing I want to say is, thinking back this the other day, I was on a train again down to my great aunt's, and I was just looking out the window, all the apple orchards on the way down. Oh, it was so lovely. Yeah, just looking out the window, smiling at the sight of just all this beautiful fruit coming. And then I got really kind of wistful and a little bit down and deflated, and thinking about my garden. And I think one of the issues this year, which is what I do not want to repeat next year. So this is the thing, isn't it? Is reflecting on the year and what I don't want to repeat next year. Because everything got so late, because I was having to work so hard to catch up, and just never feeling like I was really getting that, and even to an extent now, honestly, the garden hasn't been much joy this year. There have been moments of joy, of course there have, you know. I was just thinking when I saw Monroe a second ago, that lovely morning afternoons sitting outside my shed, making my bean arches, and Monroe was playing with the string. So cute. So there've been little moments like that, and when I had my tinkering day, and I think back in May I had a day just with flowers, what have you. But for the most part, this year the garden has, it's been a chore. It's been an absolute blasted chore, and there have been so many days that I really, really, really haven't enjoyed it. Now, I know there might be, especially the trolls, shouting, "Oh, well, why'd you do it then? No one's forcing you." No, of course they're not. But again, this is hopefully sharing my experience for anyone else who's had that sort of year. Yeah, it was a chore. It was really horrible. When I got to the middle of July, I was thinking, finally, I'm getting to that time when the garden will be a joy again. And then, of course, as we know, I've now had 6 weeks of absence. The reason I keep going is because I know that usually there are a lot of moments of joy. Yeah, there's the drudge work every year that makes me, oh, why have I got a garden? You know, it's the hard work. But it was all exacerbated this year. So I know I'm rambling now. I will shut up in a minute because I've got to sort out my onions. The whole issue this year is that time thing, because the whole spring, so February, March, April, May, all got squashed into May. It just wasn't possible. Even if I was a full-time gardener and fully able-bodied, it would have still been a mammoth effort to do it all in May. Just not possible. So, because I've been chasing my tail the whole year, it's just felt like pure grunt chore every time I've visited. Well, with the exception of two or three visits. Yeah, every time I've visited, it has just felt like flipping hard work. And yeah, haven't enjoyed it. That's the truth. That's, you know, the ups and downs of gardening. I have not enjoyed it, and there have been times when I wished I didn't even have the garden. Only a few. And almost the minute I think that thought, I think, no, what would you be without your garden? It will be different next year. I am determined to make sure it's different next year. I know in some aspects it will be, because there are already things I've put in place in terms of my time to free myself up. So I know that it'll be better from that point of view. The weather, I've got no control over. I've no idea what it will do. You know, last year we had drought, and a lot of folks said, well, why don't you start planting more drought-tolerant plants? And I remember answering a few people saying, well, I won't do drought-tolerant plants because it's quite likely we'll have another wet summer soon. and here we go. This year you might think, well, why don't you plant plants which are more tolerant to sort of cool, wet summers? Well, yeah, but then we might get a drought again. Anyway, right. Oh my goodness, that was a burble, wasn't it? I've just felt the need to get this off my chest for so long. I don't mean this to be miserable. It's not miserable. I mean, it is. It is miserable, let's face it. But, you know, fundamentally, I think the message is, even in your worst year, don't give up. Because the chances are next year will be much better. Chances are the previous year was much better. To have a really, really rotten year like this, for me anyway, I know that it's a blip. This isn't normal. The weather, like I said, we can't control that, can we? But the time issues this year, they will be resolved and won't be an issue next year. So, onwards and upwards. Always, always onwards and upwards. And if you're struggling and feeling about it now, you know what? Let's all just start fantasising about next year already. Try to rescue what you can this year. If you can't rescue much, maybe just start prepping the beds now for next year. Let's be positive. Let's find a way to make the autumn positive as we take ourselves into winter, as gardeners have a bit of a rest and prepare ourselves to hit the ground running next year and learn from this year, put our lessons into action next year, and next year have our best gardens ever. Despite what the weather is doing, we'll have our best gardens ever. And in the meantime, we can enjoy, even if it's 1/10 of our normal harvest, we can still enjoy it, can't we? Alright, lovelies, I'm going to say cheerio to you all now. I'm going to get these onions strung up, and then I'm going to go and do some digging up of buried treasure in readiness to get some more brassicas in. So I'll see you then. But for now, cheerio.